I spent 32 years building a life around one promise, that I would never let my wife end up alone in a room she didn't recognize, with strangers who didn't know her name. Turns out, the man who came closest to breaking that promise had a key to our house the whole time, because I gave him one myself. Nobody tells you what it actually feels like to become a caregiver. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock you flat in one single moment you can point back to later and say, that was the day everything changed. No, it works on you the way frost works on a windshield overnight. Slow, quiet. You don't see it happening until you're standing in your own kitchen at 6 in the morning, and you realize you can't remember the last time you finished a cup of coffee while it was still hot. You can't remember the last full night of sleep. You can't remember the last time somebody asked how you were doing and actually stood there long enough to hear the real answer. That was me. Walter Doss, 68 years old, 30 years as a machinist and floor supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside Dayton, Ohio, before I retired with a pension I was proud of and a house on Winding Creek Lane that I paid off in the summer of 2011. Nothing fancy. Brick ranch, 2 acres, a porch my wife Carol used to sit on every evening with a glass of sweet tea, watching the fireflies come up out of the grass like the whole yard was breathing. We bought that house in 1988. Carol walked through it once, stood in the kitchen with her hand on the counter, and said, "Walter, this is where we grow old." She was right about almost everything in 36 years of marriage. I stopped being surprised by that a long time ago. For the last 19 months, I had been Carol's full-time caregiver. My wife, the woman who raised our 2 kids, who worked 22 years at the elementary school 2 miles from our house, who could quiet a screaming 5-year-old just by kneeling down and looking him in the eye. Carol was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 61. I want to say that plainly, because I've learned that when you don't say the actual name of the thing, people fill in the blank with something smaller than what it really is. It was Alzheimer's. It took her ability to remember what she ate for breakfast, and some days it took her ability to remember which room of the house she was standing in. From the day Dr. Patricia Nwosu said those words to us in her office on Far Hills Avenue, my entire world folded down into medication schedules, doctor's appointments, good days, and bad days. That was my whole life. Every bit of it. But here's what I didn't know was happening at the exact same time, in the same 19 months. The man I called my son-in-law, the man I had thanked God for more times than I could count, had been quietly robbing me blind. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how he did it, step by step, because I think somebody out there watching this needs to hear it before it happens to them instead of after. Before we get into it, if this kind of story matters to you, real families, real consequences, do me a favor and hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means more than you'd think to a channel like this one. Drop a like too, and tell me in the comments if you've ever trusted the wrong person with something that mattered. You are not going to want to look away from this one. Dr. Nwosu told us on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember driving home in complete silence down Wilmington Pike, Carol asleep in the passenger seat with her head against the window, one hand open in her lap like she was waiting for somebody to place something in it. I watched her at every stoplight. I kept telling myself, just drive, just get her home, get her inside, fall apart later. I pulled into our driveway on Winding Creek Lane and sat there for almost 25 minutes without moving. I thought about the retirement account. $291,000, every dollar of it earmarked. Not for a boat, not for a cruise, not for any of the things a retired man is supposed to spend his money on. Every single dollar was for Carol for the memory care wing at Bethany Village that I had already quietly toured twice without telling a soul, for the fear I had carried alone for years, and never once said out loud to another living person that I would die before her, and she would be left with nothing and nobody who truly understood how to care for her. At 68, that fear stops being abstract. It's the last thing I think about every single night before I close my eyes. 4 days after Dr. Nwosu's office, my phone rang. My daughter, Emily's husband, Marcus. Marcus Renner, 34 years old. Married into our family 9 years earlier, a man who had always been polite at holidays and mostly quiet. The kind of son-in-law you don't think about much because he never gives you a reason to. "Walter," he said. His voice was warm, steady, the voice of a man who has already decided something and isn't asking your permission. I'm coming by more. You can't do this by yourself, and I'm not going to let you try. I want you to understand something about me. I don't cry easily. 30 years on a factory floor, a father who thought showing emotion in front of other men was a kind of weakness, and I absorbed that whether I wanted to or not. I sat through my own father's funeral without shedding a tear. I sat through 2 rounds of layoffs at the plant where I had to look grown men in the eye and tell them their jobs were gone. I kept it together through all of it. I cried on that phone call with Marcus. Couldn't get a full sentence out for almost a minute. Just held the phone against my ear and breathed like a man who'd been underwater too long. I thought, this is the son Emily always told me he could be. She'd said it for years, quiet doesn't mean uninvolved. Dad, give him a chance, and here he was, finally proving her right at the exact moment it counted most. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't dread keeping me awake. It was relief. Now stop with me right here, because I need you to hold something in your mind for the rest of this story. Everything I'm about to describe, every kind gesture, every warm visit, every single time Marcus showed up and made my life easier, I want you to remember it, sitting right alongside one fact I did not learn until much, much later. The first unauthorized withdrawal from my retirement account happened 6 days after Carol's diagnosis. 6 days. He wasn't coming around because his wife's family needed him. He saw an opportunity dressed up as a crisis, and he stepped into it before I'd even finished grieving what we'd just been told. But I didn't know that yet. So let me tell you what I did see, because what I saw was more than enough to fool a 68-year-old man who spent 3 decades reading gauges and blueprints and thought he knew a thing or two about reading people. Marcus lived about 15 minutes away in a townhouse over in Kettering, close enough to be present, far enough to still look like a man with his own life. He started coming by 4 or 5 times a week. He came to Carol's neurology appointments, shook hands with her care team, remembered the nurses' names, asked good questions. Dr. Nwosu told me once it was rare to see a son-in-law that engaged. I stood there in that office, practically glowing with gratitude. He took over the bills, the insurance calls. The pharmacy runs to the CVS on Wilmington Pike, the grocery trips to the Kroger on Far Hills. He handled every single thing that had been slowly drowning me, and he made it look effortless. I thanked God for that boy every single day of my life. Here's what I didn't know. He was paying very close attention to every number he touched. Month 2, Carol had 4 bad days in a row, confused, frightened, asking for her mother, who had been gone since 1994. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night for almost 2 weeks straight. I forgot to pay the water bill for the first time in my adult life, 41 years, not once, and then I forgot. Marcus came over on a Thursday evening and sat across from me at the kitchen table on Winding Creek Lane. He had a folder with him. He set it down carefully, like a man who'd rehearsed the moment in his head more than once. Walter, I need to ask you something, and I really need you to hear me. He had this way of talking slow, deliberate, like every word had been practiced enough times that it no longer sounded practiced. Like a man who'd read a manual on your exact fears and was handing them back to you gift-wrapped as a solution. You're 68. Carol's 62. If something happens to you tomorrow, and I'm not trying to scare you, I'm trying to protect both of you, what happens to her? Everything's in your name. Your pension is in your name. If you go first, all of it freezes while lawyers sort through it, and Carol is sitting in this house during the worst moment of her life with no way to access a single dollar. I sat with that sentence. Every word landed exactly on the fear that already lived in me at 3 in the morning, like he'd been standing in my head reading my own thoughts back to me off the wall. These are power of attorney documents, he said, opening the folder slow, giving me time to look. It just means I can handle the financial side completely, the bills, the account access, the pension paperwork, while you focus every ounce of your energy on Carol. You are already carrying too much, Walter. Let me carry this part. I looked at those papers. My eyes were heavy. My hands were tired in that particular way that isn't about muscles. It's about your whole nervous system running on fumes and love, and the kind of exhaustion that gets into your decision-making, into the part of your brain that's supposed to slow down and actually read something before you sign it. I signed. Marcus had it notarized the following morning at a UPS store on Woodman Drive. He told me, casually, like it was nothing at all. And God help me, I slept better that night than I had in 3 months. I thought I had finally handed something heavy to somebody strong enough to hold it. What I had actually done was hand him the keys to everything I had spent my whole working life saving. Fast forward through 19 months. 5 a.m. medications. Bad days folded into good days folded into bad days again. Carol laughing at a memory from 1993 like it happened yesterday morning. And then 20 minutes later, not recognizing the living room she'd lived in for 36 years. 19 months of doing math in the dark after she finally fell asleep. How long will the money last? Will it be enough? Will I be enough? Sunday dinner. My son's house this time, over in Centerville. My son Danny, the oldest, the one who inherited his mother's patience and my stubbornness in roughly equal parts. His wife, Priya, works as a compliance analyst at a regional bank downtown, quiet woman, the kind you might overlook at a party and desperately need in a crisis. Pot roast, the grandkids running loud through the hallway the way grandkids are supposed to on a Sunday evening. Carol was in the yellow cardigan I love on her, having a genuinely good day present, warm, laughing at something Marcus had just said across the table. Marcus was loud that night, generous, refilling everybody's glasses without being asked, telling a story about a fishing trip up near Indian Lake with the easy, untroubled confidence of a man with absolutely nothing weighing on his conscience. And then Priya's hand found mine under the table. She pressed her phone into my palm without turning her head. 6 words lit up the screen. Dad, check your retirement account now. Underneath it, 4 more words. Then say you feel dizzy. I looked up at her. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were completely still. The eyes of somebody who has been waiting a long time to open a door she'd already decided she was going to open. One slow nod. The kind that means trust me, don't ask, just trust me. I opened my banking app under the tablecloth. I hadn't looked at that account in months. Marcus handled the finances. That was the arrangement. That was what I had agreed to. The number on the screen read $9,412. I stared at it like it was written in a language I didn't speak. There had been $291,000 in that account, every dollar of it saved across 30 years on a factory floor. $9,412. Marcus was laughing at the end of his own story across the table. Carol was smiling along, bless her heart, even though she'd lost the thread of it 2 sentences back. The grandkids were still running. The house smelled like rosemary and warm bread. I put my hand flat against my chest. I don't feel right, I said quietly. Little dizzy. I might need to step outside. Emily, my other daughter, Danny's sister, who'd come with her own family that night, was up out of her chair before I finished the sentence. Concern written so convincingly across her face that even Marcus looked briefly rattled. She takes after her mother that way. She can perform calm the way other people breathe. Danny helped me out to the car. And Marcus, my son-in-law, married into this family for 9 years. A man I had trusted enough to hand my entire financial life to stood in the doorway of his brother-in-law's house in Centerville and called out, "Feel better, Walter. I'll swing by tomorrow and check on you." I sat in that car, and the first thought that came to me wasn't about myself. It wasn't even really about the money. Not at first. It was about Carol. That $291,000 was her safety net. It was Bethany Village, the memory care wing I'd walked through twice in secret, talking to the staff, checking every hallway, making sure it was good enough for her. It was 36 years of quietly building a wall around the woman I was terrified of one day leaving behind. Gone. And the man who took it was standing in a warm, lit doorway in Centerville, Ohio, waving goodbye like he hadn't touched a single dollar of it. The truth doesn't come to you all at once. It arrives in pieces, and every piece breaks something different inside you. Picture a 68-year-old man sitting in the passenger seat of a gray Buick on a quiet Sunday evening in Centerville, Ohio. Engine running, streetlights just starting to flicker on. His grandkids' laughter still faintly audible through the walls of his son's house behind him. That man is staring at $9,412 on a phone screen, and he is very, very still. Not because he was calm. I need to be honest about that. I was the furthest thing from calm. It was the kind of stillness that happens when your brain receives something so catastrophic it simply refuses to process any further until it understands what it's looking at. Like a machine handed apart it was never built to hold. Priya pulled out of the driveway without a word. She didn't drive us home. She drove us downtown, to the bank branch on Main Street where she worked compliance, 7th floor, empty on a Sunday evening, our footsteps echoing off the marble like we were walking into a church. Which, in a way, I suppose we were. She was about to show me something sacred and devastating, and I was not going to walk out of that room the same man who walked in. If stories like this one matter to you, the quiet kind of betrayal, the kind that hides behind Sunday dinners, go ahead and hit that like button now and subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories. Priya closed the office door. She sat down across from me the way a doctor sits down right before telling you something you cannot unhear. "Walter," she said. She had never called me by my first name before. It was always Dad. "Everything I'm about to show you has been verified 3 separate times. I didn't come to you with a suspicion. I came to you with a case." "How long have you known?" I asked. 5 months. 5 months. I let that number sit in the room for a second. I wasn't angry yet. Not at her. The look on her face told me those 5 months hadn't been easy for her either. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" She folded her hands on the desk. "Because Danny needed to be completely sure before we destroyed his sister's marriage in front of her father. And because I needed every door closed before Marcus knew one had ever been open." I nodded, slow. I understood completely. Then she opened the folder. She started with the withdrawals. 17 months of them. Always between $2,000 and $4,500. Never above $5,000. Spread out at irregular intervals. Never the same week twice. Never the same amount twice. Sloppy enough to look ordinary. Careful enough to stay under the radar of automatic reporting. "There's a name for this technique," Priya said, sliding the first document across the desk. "It's called structuring. It's a federal crime, completely separate from the underlying fraud." I looked down the timeline of withdrawal receipts laid out across her desk. 17 months. Neat, documented, damning. My son-in-law had been stealing from me with the same patient discipline I'd spent 30 years applying to precision machine work. He just finally aimed that discipline at something that wasn't good for anybody. Then the pension. Marcus had used the power of attorney, the same document I'd signed at my own kitchen table on the night I was too exhausted to read it properly to contact my pension administrator directly. Everything looked legitimate because on paper it was. He requested my monthly distributions be redirected to a secondary account under his control. The administrator processed it without a second look. Why would they question it? The paperwork was flawless. He'd made certain of that. I didn't respond right away. I just did the math in my head and felt something move through my chest that I don't have a clean word for. Not rage exactly. Not grief exactly. Something older and colder than either one. Then the statements. Marcus had quietly changed the mailing address on my retirement account to a P.O. box he'd opened privately across town. I'd stopped receiving paper statements months ago, and because Marcus handled the finances because that was the arrangement, because I trusted him completely, I had never once noticed they'd stopped coming. I'd been flying blind for the better part of a year, and my own son-in-law was the one who'd cut the lights. Then Carol's account. Priya slid a single sheet across the desk, and I knew from the look on her face before I even glanced down that this one was going to hurt the most. Carol had kept a small private savings account for almost 30 years, her own quiet money. A little bit of personal security in a marriage where I'd handled most of the finances. She never talked about it much, it was just hers. Something she'd built slowly and carefully across 3 decades. The way women of her generation sometimes kept something small and separate just for themselves. Gone. Liquidated completely, using her power of attorney. On her bad days, she didn't remember it existed. On her good days, she never thought to check. Marcus had chosen his moment with surgical precision. I put both hands flat on Priya's desk and just looked at them for a while. Old hands. Hands that had worked a factory floor for 30 years. Hands that had signed documents at a kitchen table on a tired night and apparently hadn't done enough to protect what mattered. "There's one more," Priya said. I looked up. She slid the final document across last. Deliberately, the way you save the heaviest thing for when a person's finally had a moment to brace. It was a beneficiary change form. My signature was on it. I remembered the morning it was signed. Month 11. A rushed Wednesday. Carol had been up most of the night, and I was running on nothing, trying to get her dressed for an appointment. Marcus had shown up with coffee and a short stack of papers. Dad, just sign these. It's routine maintenance. I've already gone through everything. I signed without reading it. Buried in that stack was a form removing Danny and Emily and every grandchild entirely as beneficiaries on my retirement account and replacing them with Marcus. My own hand, my own signature. Erasing my own children from everything I'd built my life around, and I hadn't even known what I was signing. Priya wasn't finished. There's something else you need to hear. And this is the part that made me act when I did. For months, Marcus had been quietly dropping comments to extended family, at cookouts, over the phone, in the church parking lot. Things like, Walter's really struggling. I worry about him constantly. He's not handling things as well as he thinks he is. I've had to step in a lot more than people realize. An elder law attorney Priya had privately consulted, recognized the pattern the moment she described it. Marcus was laying groundwork for a conservatorship petition. If he could get me declared financially incompetent through the courts, everything he'd been doing illegally would become court-sanctioned overnight. Every dollar I still had left would move under his legal control. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was building a legal cage around me, one careful, casual comment at a time. I sat in that chair on the 7th floor of a bank building on Main Street and looked at Priya Renner, my son's wife, the quiet woman nobody notices at holidays, the woman I'd shared a table with for 9 years, and I felt something shift permanently in my chest. How'd you find it? I asked. A routine compliance flag, she said. The structured withdrawals tripped a pattern report. I pulled the file. I saw your name on it. And then? I closed my office door and didn't say a word to a living soul until I was completely sure. My phone rang. Emily. Priya put it on speaker. My daughter's voice was tightly controlled, the voice of a woman holding herself together through pure will and barely succeeding. Carol was fine, she said. The grandkids were settled. Marcus was still at Danny's house, asking after my health, hovering with concern, performing devotion for an audience of exactly one. Then she paused. Dad, she said quietly, Mom just told Marcus he's a good son to her. She patted his hand. None of us said anything for a moment. We just sat there with that sentence. I told Emily to say I just needed some air. She said okay, kept her voice steady. Then the line went quiet, and I could hear her breathing hard through her nose, the way she does when she's refusing to let herself cry in front of people who need her to hold it together. I thought about what that moment must have cost my daughter-in-law. Emily had spent years defending Marcus to me, to her mother, to relatives who whispered things at Thanksgiving, to her own doubts at 2 a.m. She'd loved him past every reasonable excuse not to, because that's what she believed marriage and family meant. And he'd used every ounce of that love as cover while he robbed her own father of the one thing that was supposed to protect her mother. Priya said something quietly then, almost to herself. What do you want to do, Walter? Here's the thing about being 68 years old, sitting in an empty office on a Sunday night with $9,412 to your name, feeling the full weight of what just happened pressing down on every bone in your body. You've got two choices. You can be loud about it, call him right now and say every true and terrible thing sitting in your chest looking for a way out. Or you can be something quieter, something colder, something that actually protects the person who matters most. I thought about Carol, about Bethany Village, about the staff I'd already spoken with, about what the rest of her life was supposed to look like if I let anger make my next decision for me. I looked at Priya. I want every door closed before he knows one was ever open. I said, not for me, for her. I want Carol protected first. Everything else comes after that. Priya nodded once. She already had a plan forming. Revenge is loud. Justice is quiet. I chose the one that would actually help my wife. There's something nobody tells you about justice. It doesn't feel the way you'd expect. You spend your whole life watching movies where the good guy gets his moment, the confrontation, the speech, the satisfaction of watching the villain finally understand what he's done. You think when your moment comes, it's going to feel like winning, like exhaling after holding your breath way too long. Nobody tells you that when it's real, when it's your own family, when the person who betrayed you married into your blood, it doesn't feel like winning at all. It feels like amputation. Necessary. Correct. Permanent. I drove home to Winding Creek Lane that night and sat in my own driveway for the second time in 19 months. The first time, I'd been trying to figure out how to protect Carol from a diagnosis. This time, I was trying to figure out how to protect her from her own son-in-law. The next morning, I was in the office of an elder law attorney named Renata Blackwood, over on Far Hills Avenue, 15 minutes from my house. Priya had already called ahead. Renata was expecting me. I walked in at 9 a.m. with every document Priya had handed me the night before, and she went through them the way a surgeon goes through a chart, methodical, unflinching, already seeing exactly what needed to come out. By noon that same day, every power of attorney document Marcus held over me and Carol had been formally revoked, filed, processed, effective immediately. He lost all legal access to both accounts before he'd even sat down for lunch. He had no idea. Renata then began emergency proceedings to correct the beneficiary form, restoring Danny, Emily, and all 4 grandchildren, and removing Marcus. My children were back in place. He was gone from every document, still no idea. Day 2. Priya's compliance department at the bank opened a formal internal investigation. The evidence trail she'd spent 5 months quietly assembling was handed over to the fraud unit in a package so clean and complete that the lead investigator, a detective named Ray Okonkwo with the Dayton Financial Crimes Unit, he told her it was the most organized case file. A private citizen had brought him in 12 years on the job. Priya just nodded and said thank you. Day 3. Marcus came by the house on Winding Creek Lane, brought takeout, sat with Carol while she watched her afternoon program, straightened the throw pillows without being asked, poured me a glass of sweet tea, and asked how I was feeling after the scare at dinner. Much better, I told him. Just tired. You know how it is. You need to take better care of yourself, Walter, he said. I worry about you. I looked at my son-in-law sitting across from me in my own living room. I thought about $9,412. I thought about Carol's private account, 30 years of her quietly setting aside a little for herself, gone completely. I thought about the conservatorship groundwork he'd been laying in the minds of people I loved for months, the cage he was building around me, one casual comment at a time. I picked up my sweet tea and said, "You're right, son. I'm going to start paying a lot closer attention to everything from here on out." He nodded, looking satisfied. He had absolutely no idea what was already moving around him. Day 4. Emily went to the house on a Tuesday morning while Marcus thought she was at work. She let herself in with her spare key and gathered up a list of original documents Renata needed, files from the back office he'd never thought to hide, because he'd never once considered that Emily might stop defending him long enough to work against him. She told me later she didn't let herself feel anything while she was inside. She stayed focused, methodical, until she was back in her car with the papers on the passenger seat. Then she sat there for almost 10 minutes before she could bring herself to drive. I didn't ask what those 10 minutes felt like. I already knew. Day 6, Renata began emergency Medicaid planning, identifying every protective measure still available given the documented fraud. She found paths I never knew existed, legal structures that could still shield Carol's care even with the accounts as depleted as they were. Bethany Village, the memory care wing I'd walked through twice in secret and prayed over in the dark, was still within reach. For the first time in 11 days, I exhaled all the way down. Day 7, Marcus came back. Stayed longer this time, asked careful questions about my health, wondered aloud whether I'd thought about updating my advance directive. Just being responsible, Walter. Just thinking ahead. I looked at my son-in-law for a long, quiet moment. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You're absolutely right, Marcus, I said. I should be thinking ahead. He smiled and drove home. Every door around him was already shut. He just hadn't tried a single one of them yet. Day 9, a Sunday, I called Marcus in the morning. "Son, I'm feeling a lot better. Come to dinner at our house this weekend. Bring something nice. We've got a lot to be thankful for." He showed up at 6 with an expensive bottle of wine and his widest smile. The table was set carefully. Carol was in the yellow cardigan, having a genuinely good day, present and warm, occasionally funny in a way that used to make me fall in love with her all over again on an ordinary Tuesday. She told a story from almost 30 years ago that got Emily laughing despite everything sitting heavy in her chest. Emily sat there with her mother's laugh in her ears and 5 months of her husband's betrayal in her bones, holding it all together with nothing but love and sheer will. Priya sat beside Danny, quiet and steady, unremarkable to anyone at that table who didn't know what she'd done, which was everyone except me. Marcus sat there being everything he'd always performed, being charming, generous, refilling glasses, laughing at his own jokes, the good son-in-law at Sunday dinner, like the last 17 months had never happened. The food was good. The company was almost convincing. And then, midway through the second course, there was a knock at the front door. I stood up. I walked across my own floors, 40 years of memory in every board, and I opened it. 2 financial crimes, detectives, plain clothes, paperwork in hand, calm and completely unhurried. Detective Okonkwo and his partner. I'd spoken with them 4 days earlier. They knew exactly where they were going and exactly who they'd come for. I heard Marcus stop, mid-sentence behind me. I stepped aside. The detectives walked in. I watched my son-in-law's face in the moment he understood what was happening, and I want to tell you this part because it matters. There was no guilt on his face first. Even then, even in that moment, his first instinct wasn't remorse. His eyes moved fast around the room to me, to Priya, to Emily, to the door, looking for an exit that no longer existed. There wasn't one. Every door had already been closed. Emily stood up slowly. She'd been thinking about what she wanted to say for 9 days. Rehearsed it, revised it, stripped it down to almost nothing. When the moment finally arrived, it was simpler than anything she'd prepared. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. "I want you to look at Mom before you leave this house, Marcus." The room went silent. Marcus looked at Carol. Carol looked back at her son-in-law with complete, uncomplicated warmth. She didn't understand what was happening around her. She thought perhaps he was leaving a little early after a lovely dinner, the way he sometimes did. She didn't want him to go just yet. She lifted her hand and waved at him gently. "Good night, sweetheart," she said softly. "You've always been such a good boy to me." Emily let that sentence sit in the room. Let it breathe. Let every single person at that table feel the full weight of what her mother's disease had just done, protected her son-in-law from ever having to watch her face change. Carol would never see, would never understand what he'd done to this family. Her illness would carry him safely through the rest of her memory with his name clean and warm inside it. He would never have to earn that. Then Emily spoke, quiet, direct, final. "She'll probably believe that forever, Marcus. Her mind is going to protect you from ever seeing her face change when she finds out. You'll never have to watch her understand what you did. But I understand it. Dad understands it. And I need you to know I saw every withdrawal you made while he was up at 5 in the morning giving her medication. Every document you had him sign while he was half blind from exhaustion trying to keep her safe. Every time you sat at this table and let him thank God for you. I know all of it. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure both of them are okay, not because I have to, because that's what actually loving somebody looks like." Marcus was walked out the front door of the house on Winding Creek Lane. Carol, my beautiful, warm, still present Carol, watched him go and waved cheerfully from her chair at the table, believing completely and peacefully that her son-in-law was simply leaving after a lovely family dinner, the way he always did. Marcus pleaded guilty 3 months later. The paper trail Priya built was too clean, too complete, for any defense attorney to argue his way around. Elder financial abuse, criminal fraud, federal structuring charges. Restitution was ordered. It comes back slowly, in pieces, the same way it was taken. Some of it isn't coming back at all. I've made my peace with that, or I'm making it. Some days, that's the most any of us can manage. But Carol's care is protected. Renata Blackwood and the emergency Medicaid planning she put in motion made absolutely certain of that. Bethany Village, the memory care wing I visited twice in secret and prayed over in the dark, is reachable now. Carol is going to be okay. Not perfect, not the life we planned out together on that porch all those years ago, but okay. And okay, right now, is everything. I still think about something I never fully understood until all of this happened. Marcus married into my blood, but Priya chose me. And when the people who are supposed to love you show you exactly who they really are, being chosen by somebody who owed you nothing at all is the thing that puts you back together. Not all the way, but enough. If this story meant something to you, do me one favor, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want more stories like it, real ones, about family, about the people who show up when it counts. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next.